My name is Imtiaz Hussain, and I'm one of the volunteers for this India Game Developer Conference, and I'm part of this company called YesGnome. We are based out of Hyderabad, and we build games for mobile, and or for global audiences rather. And yeah, that's my intro. I would also like you guys to quickly introduce yourself, and then I can explain how I
Sure,
started.
sure, sure, sure. So first of all, your introduction was very understated, Imtiaz, right? You've been around for a long time in this space. Siddharth, you guys can call me Sid. I run the studio called PlaySimple Games, based out of Bangalore. We make word casual games. We're 5 years old. As a company, we've spent about 10 years in this industry.
Very nice to be here. Sam Fisher. I'm visiting from Canada, and it's snowing at home today, so it's nice to be in a warm spot. Thank you. It's the mobile gaming space. Most of our games are on the mobile platforms. We've also done on PS4 and Steam, but our main titles are the adventure capitalist, adventure communist games. It brings me such great joy to be able to come in and people who actually have played that in India, and so it's a great joy to be here. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for.
Yeah, hi. My name is Anuj. I've been in the Indian industry, game industry, for almost 11 years. Started off with my own startup, Rollicule Games, then moved on to build the gaming business for Nazara as head of game publishing there, and then started Yoozoo India. Yoozoo is a Chinese public listed company. We primarily are very good at MMORPGs, ARPGs, have IPs such as Game of Thrones and others. The India unit is specifically focused to target the India as well as the MENA market.
Great. Before we start, I want to quickly check the kind of audience that we have right now. So how many of you have your own studios or are primarily working for a gaming studio right now? Great. Because the reason I'm asking is a lot of times we would have folks from ad networks and other stuff. So that's the intent. And no, this is a game developer conference, so all the guys are from gaming industry. So the way we want to structure this conversation is the decision someone needs to take in the production stage, and then you also have on the business aspect of it. So we'll break it down into two pieces there. Primarily, you're gonna cover this would be around the studios who are mid-size to small, studios, indie studios, and so in general, what happens is you get excited as a gaming company. You get excited about an idea, and what you do is you try to, let's quickly try to build a prototype, right? And now a lot of times people have difficulty, or the studios would have difficulty. Hey, what are the factors that are key to validate a prototype? And what would be a good team size to have a prototype done? So, Sid, you may like to talk about that because you have been there for some time there.
Yeah, so I can take that one. I think there were two parts of the question, and this question is supposed to sort of address the small teams and the mid-sized team. I think I had a session yesterday, and I think the emphasis there was on data, right? And I would link it back to that. I think very important to actually think how will you start measuring some of the aspects that you think that your game would is supposed to show, right? Which is around, okay, how much time are they spending in a day? How long was their first session, and how frequently are they coming back? I think that's really important, and that's how we look at games we build. Okay, what's the D0 session time that it looks like? Help us decide whether to continue to keep investing, and what are the things that we need to do. The second thing that was part of the question is that, hey, what kind of team should you have in that stage? I think we feel that the early stage of the game development, you need folks who are very creatively bent, right? There are different folks. There are folks who are more creative. There are folks who are more control oriented. There are folks who are more collaborative. I think analytical, right? So since the game or the prototype is almost in drawing board, right? And that's where you sort of like sketching the entire picture of how the game would be. So I think I would stick to creative folks early stage, and looking at session times to really see whether that idea is sticking on the wall or not.
Sam, do you have an opinion there in terms of what would be a good cycle?
It's a really tough cycle because that magic that you want to capture, that lightning in the bottle, I mean, that, that is gold when you can do that. And so creating an environment where that is achievable, it just cannot be overstated how valuable that is to a studio. You have one flash and that can take your studio for the next 10 years. I mean, it's just amazing how that can happen. So some of the things that come to mind is that we try to put a bit of a box. The total blank page for the creative process is a very ominous, scary place to be. So putting at least a box. Now, I think that box can be defined in different ways at different studios as to what your constraints are. And I think for us, we've changed those constraints at different times. To give an example, at one point we were, how can we create a game that does, that's going to be mobile and that it's going to be single player, it's going to do these type of things. Then all of a sudden we said, well, now it has to be a game that uses certain tools because we needed to have a certain, and it has to have the same analytics package to make sure that we were always talking the same analytics because one analytics package is different than another. So then we started to create it in a different way. So whatever that box is for your team, you come up with what that box is and work within that box. So for us, we're currently looking at how we can use idle clicker mechanics to be used in such a way so that they can create new types of games, and we have a certain tool set that we use. We don't say this is the market it needs to go towards because we think market is a lousy way to determine what your creative juice should be. Don't try to create it for the market, create it for creativity's sake, I think is more where we are. But as far as the team and the team composure, we made the mistake of having single teams at that point in time. And what I witnessed was that the single creator became crushed by the surrounding group. It was sad because you had the most energetic, creative people just going into their room and slowly sinking into oblivion. And so what I've learned through that is that the creative team at least has to have some substance to it. We're not believers in big teams, but we would be small, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 4, no bigger. And that's sort of what we would see of a creative team composition. But putting a person by themselves, I think, is like putting an anchor, and that's a difficult thing.
I think some real good words of wisdom there. I must appreciate. I think very similar has been the experience where, and I think something that you mentioned is that hey, if you just put the creative people out there, they can go everywhere, right? So very important to put the guardrails around, to put the box around, to make sure the idea is contained. Okay, this is what we're building, right? To have the game vision of sorts in the first place. The second thing also around like to have a balance of people. We've also observed that basically that's one stage of the business that you need a lot of persistence, you need a lot of grit to continue to keep on it because it is something that will keep you challenged and you have to overcome it time and again. Yeah.
Yeah, that actually leads to other questions that Anuj, you might like to take this. So you build the prototype, and you have this lot of grit, as you were saying. You continue to do it, but there should be a point where a studio should take a decision. Hey, this is when I should kill, and what would be good factors for that, or something which someone needs to have there in the checklist. Okay, now I have to kill this, or maybe continue with this.
Yeah, so I think it's never easy to figure out when the prototype is actually a prototype or you're reaching towards an MVP and keep polishing. It's very perspective on the leadership of the studio, who are the most experienced. You have to sometimes trust their judgment. The mechanics can keep getting polished to a certain level, but the call has to be then taken by the lead producer or the lead game designer, and their call have to be respected by the studio, or it has to be a decision. For smaller studios, it is very much gut driven and enthusiasm driven, which is very important as well, because that is the real joy of the creation. That enthusiasm, if it dies, which dies in large corporations, as you progress, you think about the market first, revenues first, and then the creative process starts, and what franchises work. So it's a sort of as you grow big, the creation process is very difficult to keep the flame alive, so to say. So when do you take that call is basically for smaller studios has to the decision has to lie with the lead producer or the lead designer and or maybe a committee. It's I don't advocate committees because big studios have these game review committees and then game design review committees and then publishing review committees, and you have to get it becomes very bureaucratic in that setup. It helps the business. I now coming from that perspective, it does help the business, but creative wise, I think prototype stage, it should be the lead game designer taking that call after the mechanics have reached a place where they feel happy about it.
Yeah, that is, I mean, you did mention about leadership team is, would come with a lot of wisdom too, and they do it. Sometimes we do come across, I'm part of the leadership team too, right? I come across places where, hey, there is a personal, I'm being very biased there when it comes for, hey, I really like the game and, there is a gut feel that this actually takes off. But I know that 80% of the people, they think that this might not take off. So for something like that, Sam, how do you leave it to the team, leave it to the team there, and how do you do that then?
Yeah, in honesty, it's probably the most agonizing part of my job as a CEO, because you love the creative process and you want that creative process to flourish. Our whole basis is how can we balance creativity and commerce? How can we make those two flourish? Because usually one of them wins in an organization, and I don't believe that it should. I think that you can have a balance. And so trying to find that is really tough. And the way that we may not be perfect at it, but the way that we try to do it is I really ask for momentum. I just ask for momentum, and I expect real players to be playing the game. And if it's a prototype and if it's internal testing, that doesn't hold a lot of weight. If it's real players who are playing it and you can show me real stats and you can show me that there's some momentum that it's being achieved, then we have a positive discussion about how we can move forward. And I think that's important because I think the team also needs to know that they're making progress. And so that they're making progress. And rarely does it ever come to the point where it's like the company or us or me has to say, you know what, we hit the line. That has happened. Unfortunately, you kind of have to sometimes, there is a point, but 9 times out of 10, it's usually the game lead who's coming like, you know what, I don't think this is the best place for us to be. We should move on. But you really got to have that data that you're talking about to have the momentum, measuring towards that, and that's usually what it is. We had a team that launched a game. It didn't do what we wanted it to do. They pulled it back. They worked on it for 4 months. It was actually a new team. They hit right to the end deadline. I had put a deadline. This is it, guys. This is what it is. That team, under that constraint, came out and they launched Adventure Communist, and now it's been a big hit. So it's an agonizing decision. You just never know. I could have killed Adventure Communist, and nobody would have known. It just would have been, we would have missed out on a very successful game.
So briefly touching on the point that I had earlier too. So I built the prototype now. The team is ready with the prototype. They started playing around with closed groups and So help me understand. Said from you come up with quite a few games there, and how do you take a decision? Is that you're trying to do the testing within the company, or you try it out with playtest code, or how do you do this, right?
So, I think question is around playtesting and validation with a larger audience,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So I think first is definitely the team which is building that. They're playing it enough. I still remember that basically so there's a PlayStation in the office and the team was not following this protocol. So I went to the PlayStation and the television and put a paper there which says, okay, you need to play your game first before you can play something else, right? So that goes back to saying that we really give that a lot of importance. Then comes testing it with lots of users to make sure that the metrics that we want to check on, are they actually sticking to that or not? Because I think there's also sort of biases that come in when people are playing, but when you hit the real market, you won't necessarily get those users. At the same time, you need to figure out what is the right audience for you, right? So basically, is that audience pool large enough? So then we invest in sort of pick up a geography where the user acquisition costs are not as high, where we can get users for much lower cost. and then we see, okay, this idea is sticking on the wall in that geography. Then we see, okay, this will work here. We then scale it up in other geographies.
I mean, you graduated there. You know, you have a game. You know, they finish the prototype. You guys liked it. The decision is that okay, fine, let's do it. And you come to a stage. Uh, a lot of times people say, hey, you need to go lean, and you need to go lean and try to do a quick soft launch and do it. So, Anuj, how do you practice at your office? You guys go lean, or you try to do a build the entire game and then do it, or
So at large studios, the general practice that is followed is the go-to-market team is totally separate from the studio that makes the game. So, like you said, there are a lot of biases and passion that the studio has. When they look at numbers, can tell you everything that you want them to tell as well, right? It's a separate team that does the soft launch. These guys have their own KPIs set, which are dispassionately viewed for each genre that they are testing the game on. You would, like Siddharth said, that you would pick up a country where where to do soft launch, which would mimic your maximum revenue generating country. Like for example, which would give you a user acquisition, but would mimic your best performing country where you think you will make the most revenue. You would try to get that user life cycle data mapped so that you can work on it and improve those numbers. So typically, if you're doing for a US focused game, you would do a Canada or an Australia soft launch. If you're focused mostly on Europe, you would pick out places such as Philippines. Somehow that works. And for different markets, you have like different soft launch markets which are easily available on the internet to understand the CPI rates and stuff. And the core part is the guy who is taking the decisions at the soft launch period and tracking those metrics is sort of not very passionate. Like a counterintuitive. You have to be passionate, but you don't have to be in love with the product. Otherwise, you don't see the clear picture as well.
and Sid, what is your opinion in terms of
So our opinion is actually very, very different from this. I think different teams have different approaches. Our approach is that basically that I think ownership needs to continue, right? And ownership comes over a period of time, right? Where there is a separate team which is the growth team, which sort of gets users and everything, right? Then the product and the business, the game team continues to work on it, and they look at the metrics. They see, okay, this is not what we want, and we've got games which have actually been in the soft launch stage for almost about a year, right? Where we've sort of perfected those games, we've sort of continued to work on those because, like I mentioned in the beginning, right? I think grit is one of the things that we really value in people. It's a process of maturity for the team, right? If either we'll get the game good or we'll get the people really good over a period of time. They will learn a lot of things, and those learnings and lessons will allow us to build more things in future. So we like to keep it like that.
So, as we navigate towards more onto the business segment of this discussion, and if I may ask you, Sam, one of the other decisions that people fail to take, or they come across is, hey, should I go with a publisher, or do it myself? So, you have worked with a publisher in the past. Now you are a publisher yourself. So, what is your opinion when it comes for a mid-sized to small studio to an indie? How do you see them taking a decision on something like this, where should and whether to go with the publisher or not? One, and two is at what stage you want to bring the publisher on board. So.
Yeah, it's a big decision and it's a good question. I don't stand from a bias of pro-publisher or anti-publisher. So the reason we went with the publisher when we started with the publisher was because there was a lot of things. We were good game makers, but we weren't good marketers. And so it would have been foolish for us to try to take that on. And we went with a publisher, and that publisher did work for us that we wouldn't have been able to do on our own. So at that point in time, 5 years ago, it was a decision that, you know what, that was the right decision for us. It was the right decision for us at that time because there was so many things about mobile publishing that we had no idea about. I think through the 5 years, what we learned is that there's a lot of things that a lot of mobile publishers don't know about mobile